And I thought, that's an interesting idea. So I told myself at the time, I'm 46 years old or 45 years old at the time, and I said, okay, look, I'm not going to get up and embarrass myself and pitch my idea. These are all college students, right? I'm just going to join his team because I think that's a great idea, and I'll tell him about the food delivery piece that is my idea. So I joined that team. There were 5 of us on that team, and we created an app to sit down at a table and order and reorder your food and then pay when you leave. And we did it in 54 hours.
We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. B1 Bank knows that entrepreneurs like you are always thinking one step ahead. So you need banking solutions that can keep up. It begins with lending. Does your business need working capital or financing for new equipment? How about a real estate or a construction loan? Good news, the B1 lending team is ready to learn your goals and help you find the best lending option available. Now let's talk about uncomplicating your daily cash flow. B1 offers a full array of treasury management services that let you collect funds faster, pay funds more efficiently, and access your information with powerful online tools. Most importantly, B1 understands the value of working with local nonprofits to build a stronger community. They believe in giving back through hands-on involvement with their B1 Community Outreach Program because it's simply the right thing to do. B1 Bank. Be uncomplicated. To learn more, visit b1bank.com. Equal housing lender, member FDIC. Hello, I'm Andrew McClendon, your host of the Next Entrepreneur Podcast. We're here today in the Propel Production Podcast Studio in Baton Rouge. We welcome our guest, Mr. Chris Meaux. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, very excited to have you. Very accomplished and a really long entrepreneurial story and a great journey, so I'm looking forward to getting into it. You're an angel investor, chairman of the board of BoomNation, Inc., and chairman of the board of Mallard Bay. So look forward to learning about those. I loved doing the research on you because it seemed like there were really like 3 distinct parts of your journey so far, and it's far from over. But that first part is like the corporate, 20 years of corporate gigs, right? A lot of tech stuff. Yep. And then there were years of your entrepreneurial startup stuff, restaurants and tech stuff. And then there's the real viral tech stuff, that third part of your journey, which starts with Waitr and then goes on to so many other things. So it's a great honor to have someone in the studio as accomplished as you are, and I really appreciate that. So the other thing I found interesting is when I think of tech startups, I think of young bucks, getting started. Right. And, your tech startup experience happened in your mid-40s, right? That's right.
Well, the successes, or the greater successes, yes.
Yeah. Good point. What started with Waitr, but I want to dial it back. So where did you grow up? Did you grow up in Louisiana?
I did. I was born and raised in Louisiana. Grew up in Esterwood, Louisiana, a little village about 6 miles west of Crowley.
No kidding.
So, small town. Went to Notre Dame High School in Crowley, Louisiana.
Okay.
Graduated there. Then went to LSU.
And what did you study at LSU?
Well, marketing.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with technology.
Really?
But I guess it just caught my interest while I was at school at LSU.
Yeah, I read a story about where you were over in Austin and you're at a party maybe in the late 80s.
Yeah, late 80s.
And you met Michael Dell at a party.
Right.
And as I read the story, I was left the impression that he left quite an impression on you.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, he was not that much older than I was,
right.
Early 20s. And he had, I think at that point, he had just taken or was about to take Dell Computer public.
Really?
Got into a conversation at this party. Him and 4 or 5 other people in a group, just talking about their beginnings and their start and how excited they were about the future of their company. And really at that point, up to that point, had not even, I guess, had never really thought I'd be interested in technology. I guess the first time I can remember being interested in technology was when we got a TRS-80 computer for Christmas one year. My parents got it for a business they were working on, and I was like, wow, this is kind of cool, right? So anyway, at that party, it just, got me really intrigued in entrepreneurship.
Were you entrepreneurial before that as a kid?
Somewhat, yeah, sure. I mean, of course, I was always looking for ways to make candy money or things like that. Yeah. So selling lemonade on the corner, and the one I remember really well, my sister and I used to, who's about 18 months younger than me, we used to sell Christmas cards and wrapping paper door to door to get points to win these little prizes in the catalogs that the card companies would give you the ability to win prizes. So yeah, I mean, from a really early age, and that was probably, I was in 3rd or 4th grade, probably we started doing that. So from an early age, I was always interested in entrepreneurship, not as a career, but just as to what it could provide you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. So it wasn't long after you got back to Baton Rouge. You're back at LSU. You actually started building computers yourself?
I did, yeah. Based on that conversation that I had with Michael Dell and some other folks from Dell Computer back then, and just started doing research about what he had done as an entrepreneur, and I actually picked up a catalog while I was in Austin at that time from a company called CompuAdd Computer, which sold a bunch of computer parts. Right. And it was basically mail order. You could order all the components to build your own computer, and then build a computer for a fraction of what it would cost you to go and purchase it. So I got that catalog, came back to Baton Rouge, started ordering parts, and started tinkering with just computer parts, trying to build a computer for myself while I was at school at LSU.
Did you get to the point where you would build for others?
I did. Not long after that, I thought, okay, well. So the first thing was I built one for myself, right?
Right.
And I remember it vividly. It was not long after color monitors came out for computers, and I'd ordered a color monitor, and I built this computer, put in the floppy disk, and they had a picture of this colorful, I don't even remember, it was some kind of monkey or orangutan or something, but really colorful face and all that. And seeing it on that monitor, I was like, wow, this is really cool. There's got to be all kinds of things you can do with this, right? And this is the late 80s, and so that got me interested in computers. And having built that computer, I thought, well, this could be a business. I can do this and sell it to other people that are looking for inexpensive computers for home or business. And so I started a company called CM Computer from my apartment at LSU.
No kid.
You can ask my roommates back then. I had computer parts all over the apartment, which used to frustrate them, but and started building computers and selling them to businesses.
No kidding.
Yeah.
And then what course did that run? Did you outgrow that? Or?
Well, no, I didn't necessarily outgrow that, but I was 19, 20 years old at the time, and so other things started to take priority.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Spent a little more time in the bars.
Did you outgrow the desire to be an entrepreneur? Well, other distractions?
I never outgrew the money that it provided at the time, but there were just things that became more interesting than trying to run a business at 18 or 19 years old that took precedence. And it was a lot of work, and I didn't I was at the point where I didn't really know how to grow it, and I didn't really know what to do next, right? Yeah. And so it kind of just faded off, I guess, and I got into other things.
Yeah. So upon graduation, you entered the corporate world?
Yeah, so my first real job, I'll say, was in 1991. I was recruited by Hyundai Electronics. And they were a PC company. Well, obviously Hyundai, the big conglomerate, Korean conglomerate. But at the time, they had a home PC division where they were building computers and selling them retail. And of course, I had done the computer build it myself thing, and then when I stopped doing that, I went to work for Computerland, which is a computer reseller here in Baton Rouge, and did sales for Computerland, and then went to work for Intercomp Computer, and then after college got recruited by Hyundai Electronics based on all the experience I'd gotten selling computers there, and they were looking for someone to call on retail in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I had some friends some of my fraternity brothers at LSU that were living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Went to visit them, fell in love with the place, decided that I was going to go to work for Hyundai, and that was my first real job out of college, corporate job, if you will.
That's interesting. Yeah. And then you carried that through for a couple of decades doing different corporate gigs,
right? 15 to 20 years, I think. Started out selling computers with Hyundai Electronics, then went to work for a computer accessory company called Optical Coating Laboratories, which had a division called Glare Guard, where they made glare screens for computer monitors. Back then, that was a big the rage, and we had privacy screens, so other people sitting next to you couldn't see your computer screen and things like that. But went to work for them, and really, when I was with Glare Guard, decided that the future of the technology business was software, and so I wanted to get into the software business, and eventually got recruited to go to work for McAfee Software, which was the most popular antivirus software at the time.
Now, did that carry you overseas? You worked in Europe?
It did, yeah. So I was with McAfee as a channel manager for retail. So my customers were people like CompUSA, Computer Software, Radio Shack, Walmart even at the time. And McAfee decided they wanted to expand internationally, and so they were looking for people from different divisions of the company that could go over to Europe. And at the time, what they did to sell software in Europe was they licensed agents. So that was effectively licensing their name and their code to companies in Europe that could sell it under the McAfee name. And so the first thing they wanted to do was go out and acquire these agents, because they had to acquire the rights to their own product back. And so I went out as the responsible party for retail and distribution. So as we acquired the agents back, we could set up a retail and third-party distribution business. And so at the time, I was probably 24, 25 years old, had some success putting the product in CompUSA and Computer City and Walmart and places like that. So they wanted me to go and lead a team to do the same out in Europe. So I moved to what originally was supposed to be France. Then that visas didn't work out to get us in France. And so then it was going to be Amsterdam, which is where our international corporate headquarters was going to be. Couldn't work out the visa situations there, so we ended up in the UK.
Oh, no kidding.
But operated in 8 different countries, so I had responsibility for 8 different countries at the time.
That must have been a pretty nice playground for a 24, 25-year-old. I mean, Europe's endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, it was fairly, well, it was very interesting, but I was a newlywed at the time, and so, I not only a newlywed, I became a dad instantly upon getting married, because my wife had a daughter who I raised now as my stepdaughter, but I raised her. And so right before that opportunity was, presented itself, I was, I had just gotten married. So it was actually a difficult period for me, even though I was fairly young. Yeah. It was great from a business perspective. Yeah, right. But, being newlywed in a foreign country with a new wife and a child, and it was a lot of challenges to it.
So, did that play any role in getting you back to the U.S. full time?
It played a massive role. Yeah. I mean, we were there we were supposed to be on a 2-year project, right? So they were going to send us out there for 2 years. Our job was to put this business together in Europe, to hire European leaders to run the various businesses that we were involved in, and then come back to the States and, do whatever was next for us here in the States.
Man, it sounds like big responsibilities for a young man.
Yeah, looking back now, it was a whirlwind. Yeah.
That's big news. So when you came back to the U.S., did you remain with McAfee, or did you?
I did, yeah. So that was an interesting time for me, because that really ultimately led to my greatest successes in entrepreneurship. Because when I came back, I was asked to put together and build, of course, the internet was really starting to fire away at that time, and everything was moving towards how can we do this online, right? And we were a packaged software company.
Right.
And the thought was packaged software ultimately was going to be just downloaded software, streamed, and then, installed on the computer and so on. So when I came back to the U.S., I started a division for the company that actually later became McAfee.com. But at the time I started it, it was going to be McAfee Garage. And the whole point was antivirus scanning your computer over the internet as opposed to buying a packaged software off the shelf to do it.
Right.
And so I got that division. That I came back to start that division, and that's that's what it was very entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
And that was what really kicked off my entrepreneurial.
So a subscription type
subscription service for now it's all you do, right?
Right.
That was the late 90s. It was
the concept of like constant updates and improvements through your subscription versus buying what's in the box.
Buying new software every time you needed an update. Correct.
Very cool.
Well, and McAfee actually pioneered that, because
really?
The McAfee, the data files that had the various virus updates were, when you bought a package of software off the shelf, those files for the updates were always downloads, or primarily downloads. You could have McAfee ship you a disk that you could do that. Now, remember, this is before the internet, or right at the beginning of the internet, right? So things were done a lot differently, but you'd update your antivirus software either by downloading a DAT file from McAfee or getting the disk to upload or to update your software. So there was no streaming, there was no subscription software back then. SaaS was not a word or an acronym. It was nothing like that, right? So we were just at the very beginnings of that.
Wow, big stuff. So at some point, you leave corporate world behind.
Yeah.
And what did that look like? And, and what was that transition, and what'd you do?
So the late 90s was a time of, the internet coming of age. And so there were just opportunities everywhere, right? And one of the things that I felt like was a real opportunity was creating software that allowed people to build their own websites. Because, of course, through the whole McAfee experience, there were challenges finding people to build a website to actually do the things that we wanted to do with the antivirus product by, subscription based. So, I thought there's got to be an easier way to get websites built. And so I started researching ways to build software to basically create a templated base application that people could pick a template, use just plain language to create a website and have a web presence. And so we called it Business Web Now at the beginning, and our goal was to build this software and then focus on doctors, dentists, and lawyers who were the least tech savvy people to get them online, get them websites. And so me and my neighbor at the time was an orthodontist, and so was kind of the one that was having a challenge getting his website too. And I said, look, we ought to do this. Let's do it together. And so we started a company called Business Web Now, and it later evolved into Commercis, which ultimately became one of the first application service providers, or now SaaS companies. But our primary goal was to host sites and software for other businesses, right? It started with the websites, and then it later became a hosting platform, a co-located infrastructure company that would host applications for other companies.
So what was the trajectory of that company? I mean, how did y'all build it?
Yeah, so that's the first time I really found out how important fundraising was to creating and building a scalable startup. So I got friends and family involved at the very beginning who put up money for us to go and do this. Of course, myself and Robert Gallagher, who was my co-founder at the time, who was the orthodontist, we put up money.
Right.
I had done pretty well with McAfee and seen that scale from a small company to an almost multi-billion-dollar market cap company. And so we put some money into building this company and raised the capital to do the rest. And through the life of that company, we raised about $20 million.
Wow.
And so, that's when I really started to put together all the pieces that were required to build and run a successful startup. Now, if your listeners know anything about the late 90s, early 2000s, it was a time of boom and bust, right?
Right.
And so in I would say 2001, 2002, things started to turn, and we were right in the middle of our period of growth, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Right,
so.
right. The
dot-com bust, yes.
Explosion. We would like to thank Castro Real Estate Services for sponsoring the Next Entrepreneur podcast. Castro Real Estate Services is a full-service real estate brokerage firm based in Baton Rouge. They can handle commercial and residential transactions in Baton Rouge and the surrounding areas. Need to buy or sell real estate? Call the company that cares about you. Castro Real Estate. Turnkey Solutions is a nationwide cybersecurity and IT systems expert, providing the services that growing businesses need to stay ahead of hackers, hurricanes, and IT nightmares. With 24/7 support teams and offices across Louisiana and Texas, they bring peace of mind to companies of all sizes. Their 5-star rated team provides lightning-fast IT support with the cybersecurity and business continuity solutions today's businesses demand. When you're looking for a technology partner to provide you with peace of mind, find out more by calling them at 225-224-6594 or chat with them online at www.tks.la/NXT. We would like to thank MBD Automation for their support of the Next Entrepreneur podcast. MBD Automation is a mechanical install contractor with a program-centric focus. So what do these guys do? They install conveyor systems, VRCs, platforms, singulators, sorters, and all sorts of other types of automated equipment. Who do they work for? They work for systems integrators, manufacturers, and end users in fulfillment centers, airports, mail processing facilities, and projects in the defense industry. MBD Automation works for numerous Fortune 500 companies across the United States and has a list of international clients that they perform work for in the U.S. as well. If MBD Automation can help you on your next project, you can find them online at mbdautomation.com. So what did it look like post.com bust? Commercis is now non-existent?
Yeah, so there were a lot of lessons in that, right? Yeah. So we had a lot of success early on, and we were really ramping the business, and then not unlike what's occurring today, by the way, and we'll talk a little more about that, I'm sure, but the tide started to turn, and at that point then as an entrepreneur, you have to figure out, okay, what do we do to survive the turning tide?
Right.
And of course, some of our biggest partners and customers started to fail. Started to go under. I mean, our entire infrastructure backbone of our company at that point was run on MCI's backbone. Well, MCI collapsed.
Oh my goodness.
One of our customers was a very well-funded subsidiary of Enron. Well, they collapsed. And so things started falling, and you had to try to figure out what to do next, right? And so I did everything that I knew that I could possibly do and got whatever advice I could to try to save the company. And in the end, it just was not possible, right? And so there were a lot of lessons about how to unwind a business and how do you, how does a business go from being a projected success into a non-existent company, and that was a really difficult period in my life because, of course, it took a personal toll both emotionally and financially on me.
Right.
Significant financial toll, and then it takes a toll on your family, right? And most, well, I say most, but a lot of families don't survive that kind of adversity.
Yeah.
I was just lucky. I was married to the best person in the world who, supported me from day one and said, "Look, I'm behind you no matter what happens," right? But
That's nice.
as an entrepreneur, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, later too. But that's the kind of support you have to have. But so for the next several years, it was just unwinding the company, figuring out how to get out from under commitments that were made and contracts that were signed, and releasing customers from obligations and all sorts of things that had to occur just to unwind the business at that point. So It was a significant, challenging time.
Yeah, I can imagine there are instances where you're building a business and you can look at the value that you're building and you can perceive that that's going to be something very significant in the future.
Yeah.
And if the tide turns, that goes away. That's a lot different than having a bunch of your capital poured into an enterprise, and that goes away.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's never a good thing to go backwards on your personal financial statement, but it's a reality of entrepreneurship.
It's
right?
entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
It's a compilation of successes and failures over time, right?
Yeah. So at some point, you are able to get that experience behind you. What is the next thing? You go into another entrepreneurial phase there. Is that right?
So during that whole time of cleaning up the mess, right, of a failed startup, I basically swore off technology. I said, okay, that's it. It moves too fast. I'm done with
explosive.
it. It's up and down. It's a roller coaster. It's a lot of things that I just didn't want to be a part of. So what other skills or what other things do I have or do I know that I can make a business out of, but not have to do it big and just make it all about me, right? And I said, well, I'm from Louisiana. What do we folks from Louisiana like more probably than anything else other than family and God? It's food.
Right.
So maybe I should get into the food business. And, wouldn't it be cool to run a restaurant? And so
how cool was that?
Yeah. So that got me kind of interested in restaurants. And, I had a friend in the Dallas-Fort Worth area at the time that was really fond of going down to Port O'Connor, Texas. And there was a restaurant down there called Clark's Seafood. And he loved that place. And, they had some real estate around it. And he wanted to buy Clark's Seafood and develop the real estate and, run the restaurant. And I thought, well, okay, that makes sense. Let's do that. Let's put some of our money into that. And so we sank some money into that and got my first taste of the restaurant business, which is not an easy business to run. And so, we did that for a while, ended up selling that property. And then I started thinking, okay, well, what do I do next? Maybe I'll open a restaurant. I was living in Southlake, Texas, which is a suburb of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So maybe I'll open up a crawfish restaurant there. And my uncle is one of the largest crawfish distributors in the country, right? Wow. He's based here in Louisiana. And so he and I opened up a crawfish restaurant for drive-through crawfish, which in Louisiana, that's, pretty common. Well, in Southlake, Texas, which is, the per cap, the median income was about $130,000 a year. They were more about sitting down and experiencing food than just driving through, picking it up, and taking it home. Yeah. And we had like 6 tables, right? So it was not built for that kind of a deal. And so, it was open seasonally, and it just, after the 3rd season, we said, look, this is just going to be really too difficult to make money unless people want to start, buying it and taking it home through our drive-through window. So, we closed that deal down after that. And I thought, okay, what's next? And so, I really wanted to make this restaurant thing a go. And so I started a company called Meaux to Go. Of course, MEAUX, the number 2, GEAUX. Yeah. For those listeners in Louisiana, we know about that. But for others, Meaux and Go, they go together. But so the idea behind that was to take the technology experience I had, take the years of restaurant experience up to that point that I had, and combine the two. So you would order on the internet, you would place an order for a meal for your entire family. We would cook that meal and then deliver it to your door.
Wow.
And that's what Meaux to Go was all about. And so another good friend of mine, Mr. Bill Vaughn, owned a building that he leased space to a kitchen equipment company. And the kitchen equipment company had a demo kitchen to demonstrate all of the equipment that they sold. And so he talked them into leasing me their demo kitchen for me to do Meaux to Go just in the evening. So we were going to be open from 4 to 10, right? Just on Monday through Saturday, closed on Sundays, and we would cook the food and deliver it, whatever your orders were placed online. So we'd get these orders coming in online, and we'd cook the food and deliver it. And it was really starting to take off. I was like, wow, this is pretty incredible. This is, maybe we're on to something here. And I hired a professional chef. I didn't do the food myself. Right. But so one day, just as we're thinking about how we're going to expand the business, and this was all just my own money, and I think maybe a few friends and family had put up some money for me to do this, but I had my whole family involved in it.
Right.
My daughter was doing deliveries, my parents were doing deliveries, they were coming in helping prepare the food from time to time. I mean, it was just a whole deal, but, and I remember it vividly. One December, the landlord who I was leasing the kitchen from came to me and said, Chris, listen, you're going to have to wrap up Meaux to Go because I've got a significant lease opportunity for the kitchen. And I'm like, really? Well, that's not good. Who wants to lease the kitchen? Well, Chick-fil-A. They want to lease it as a test kitchen. I'm like, oh, Lord, I can't compete with what they're paying. They were going to pay 3 times what I was paying on a monthly basis, right? So I had to try to find another kitchen. Well, I found one, but it was just too far away from my core customer. So I was never really able to make that happen. Well, that was the catalyst to Waitr. So that was the precursor, if you will, the idea that, got me fired up about entrepreneurship again, got me fired up about technology again, which ultimately led to Waitr.
Okay, so the story I read is there were a couple of restaurants at the time that would deliver, maybe Chinese or pizza.
That's it, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you wanted something else, you had to go there.
You didn't have an option.
So,
which is why I started Meaux to Go.
Yeah. Which, so walk us through the logic behind the start of Waitr. Is you have, your idea was to be able to provide this service to all the restaurants, right?
Yeah. So in Meaux to Go, when we shut that down because of the kitchen situation, I have a notebook, and I still have it today, but I used to jot down all my ideas in this notebook, right? And so, I went through my notebook and started looking at, okay, what were the things that I thought at the time were a bad idea that maybe today are a better idea? And I started doing research around those things, right? And one of the things that I discovered, and this was, that was all while I was living in Texas, the Meaux to Go, everything else. Right. Right after Meaux to Go, I ended up moving back to Louisiana. My wife and I both from here. Our daughter was at LSU at the time. We wanted to get closer to family, and so we moved back to Louisiana, and a couple other things there that happened in between that and Waitr.
But one of them particularly interesting. You were manager of the Arena Football League.
The Louisiana Swashbucklers. Yeah, so didn't know if you wanted to talk about that, but that's what brought me back to Louisiana.
Yeah, that is amazing.
So a friend of mine in South Lake, Texas, worked for Adidas and Nike for many years and was a big sports fan and had always wanted to own a minor league sports team. So after the Meaux to Go thing closed, he wanted to buy this minor league sports team. It just happened to be in Lake Charles, Louisiana. He knew I was from Louisiana. He said, look, man, you're in between things. Why don't you go back to Louisiana, move back to Louisiana and run this team for me? And we had been wanting to move back, right? And so we did that. We came back to run a football team.
That must have been a wild experience.
That was an incredible experience, in both good and bad ways.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
It just like a lot of things over those years in entrepreneurship in general, there are a lot of things that you start and they don't work out the way you think they're going to work out. And so then you have to decide, what do you do next?
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't pass up that opportunity. It sounds like too much fun.
I mean, hell, general manager of a football team.
Yeah, come on.
An indoor football. And it is an exciting sport. I mean, it is an incredibly exciting sport.
Right.
But, so it was an arena football team. Yeah. We did that deal for 3 years. Yeah,
that's cool. The whole thing about Waitr is it was new, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but there's parts of it where you talk about growing the concept, like getting that first connection with your customer. Like, wasn't there a part of it where you actually were ordering from the table? How did that work?
Yeah, so that's how we started. Right. Okay, so remember, I had the context of Meaux to Go. Right. Order online, get it delivered to your door. And in August of 2013, I went to an event called Startup Weekend. So Lake Charles had just built the Lake Charles Seed Center, or the McNeese Seed Center, which was something that came out of Hurricane Rita and some funding that they had gotten for Hurricane Rita to build this entrepreneurial center to help companies grow in the Lake Charles area. And so I went on a tour of this facility right when it opened. And of course, me being an entrepreneur, the light bulb was, wow, this is a great place. It's a beautiful facility. It had all the things that a technology company needed to get started and to support them growing and all these things. And I'm like, I had heard of an event called Startup Weekend, which helped create new companies, and I wanted to host an event at the Seed Center. Yeah. Well, you couldn't host a Startup Weekend event unless you had participated in one. And now I think Startup Weekend is owned by TechCrunch, but at the time it wasn't. And so I had to go participate in a Startup Weekend. So the next available Startup Weekend from the point that I saw that was coming up in October, and it was in Gainesville, Florida. And I could drive to Gainesville, Florida. My sister and her husband lived in Orlando, and so I'd have a place to stay while I went to do this Startup Weekend. Because remember, I had a bunch of, small successes and large failures along the way. Money was not something I had at that time.
Right.
So I was looking for anything that I could do to try to just earn a living. Right. Luckily, my wife had a good job and, was able to make enough money to help support the family. But so I was just looking for something that I could do to get back into the entrepreneurship game, and Startup Weekend was going to be that thing. So I went to a Startup Weekend in Gainesville, Florida. I had my ideas in my notebook. And I was going to get up and pitch an idea about, getting food delivered to your door. The Meaux to Go concept, but this time with doing it for restaurants.
Right.
And this other guy gets up and says, I hate waiters, and so I want to create an app where you could order at the table, you could pay your check whenever you're ready and leave on your time and not have to wait for a waiter. And I thought, that's an interesting idea. So I told myself at the time, I'm 46 years old or 45 years old at the time, and I said, okay, look, I'm not going to get up and embarrass myself and pitch my idea. These are all college students, right? I'm just going to join his team because I think that's a great idea, and I'll tell him about the food delivery piece that is my idea. So I joined that team. There were 5 of us on that team, and we created an app to sit down at a table and order and reorder your food and then pay when you leave. And we did it in 54 hours.
No kidding.
Right? So you had
code writing and all? Or?
Two of those members of that team were software developers that could write the code. And then myself with the entrepreneurship experience and the ability to raise capital and those things. And then two other guys, Addison Killebrew and Evan Diaz DRC, were going to be the business development side of that. All four of them were college students at the University of Florida, and then me. And we actually won the competition that weekend. Okay. So I looked at those guys and I said, listen, I'm going to go back to Louisiana. I'm going to raise the startup capital we need to get this business started. Who wants to be a part of it? Well, two of them, Addison and Evan, said they were willing to be a part of it. And the other two said, look, we're already with another startup called Feather. And it was Feather with no E, so Feathr, which is, by the way, how Waitr got its name. It was Waitr with no E. So they didn't want to be a part of it, even though we were going to, I was going to go and raise the money. I don't think they believed I'd raise the money to do it, right? So that's what I did. Came back to Louisiana, back to Lake Charles, and raised $200,000 in startup capital to get Waitr started.
So at some point you went and tried to raise money as you start to get this going, and venture capitalists in Silicon Valley or Austin or Boston, and they're like, not so much, not if you're going to start this in Lake Charles.
Yeah, so my grand plan was I'd raise some friends and family money, which was that first $200,000.
Right.
But then I would go to venture capitalists and I would tell them about this great idea. And at the time, this is 2013, no one was doing this, right? I mean, Grubhub was facilitating orders in New York and Chicago for restaurants that did their own delivery. And so I thought, well, venture capital is going to love this. So the first thing I did was went to meetings in Houston, Austin, and Boston and met with several different venture capital firms, all of which thought this was a great idea and that we were on to something, and there was not a lot of competition in the market at the time because there wasn't. But the first thing that they insisted was, yes, we're interested, but you could never do this in Lake Charles, Louisiana. You're going to have to move to Austin, Boston, or Silicon Valley.
Right.
And so if we're going to fund it and we're going to be behind it, then you need to be willing to move. And of course, I had a family at the time. I wasn't, I just moved from the Dallas-Fort Worth area back to Louisiana. Our daughter was, in college. Our son was in high school. It was not a time to be moving. And so I was like, well, no, I'm not really interested in doing that. But look, I was really thinking about it. And then something happened that I guess really changed everything for me. So Steve Case, who was the founder of AOL, he came to an event, and I don't remember the event's name. It was in New Orleans. It was hosted by Idea Village, I think. Yeah. But he came to speak at that event. And so me and a couple of my co-founders went to that event to listen to Steve speak. And it was a small audience, and so this audience got a chance. As a matter of fact, Walter Isaacson was on that panel with him at that event. And so we could ask questions. And so I got up, and my question was, how do you navigate raising capital when you're a Louisiana-based startup and you're talking to venture capital, which is primarily in, three hubs, Silicon Valley, Austin, and Boston. How do you raise money without having to move your operation to one of those hubs? And he said, that's a great question. And his whole deal was about funding startups. This whole event was about funding startups outside of the typical startup hubs. And so he said, you have to stick to your guns. You know your business. You know what you're capable of. Don't let anyone else tell you what you have to do because they think it's best for your business. You do what you think is best for your business. Well, that was a pretty inspirational moment for me, and I realized, okay, I'm going to have to do this by finding other ways to raise capital outside of traditional venture capital in order to make this work.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you were able to raise money locally?
So we started. We got that first $200,000, and that allowed us to build the first version of Waitr, what we called an MVP or minimum viable product. Right. But we could go and test it, right? So we went into the restaurants and we tested the sit down and dine in and all those things, and there was something to it, right? And so that allowed us to go out to other investors, and I started reaching out to people who I had a very small network in the Lake Charles area at the time, but I knew some of the right people that could get me to people who would be interested as investors. And so I started reaching out to some of those folks. They were interested, and so we raised a little bit of additional capital and tried to do the sit-down order on the app. But there were challenges with that were going to make it really difficult to scale. And so that's when the idea, I pulled the idea out of my notebook for, food delivery for restaurants that really started to get us going.
Pivotal is pleased to sponsor the Next Entrepreneur podcast. Pivotal is a commercial building contractor that performs new building construction, building maintenance, tenant improvements, renovations, and additions. Pivotal has been in business for over 25 years. The Pivotal team is simply the best. They have an impeccable safety record, and they crush schedules. A focus on quality and professional communication is at the root of their success. Pivotal also performs programs for clients who build in multiple markets with current projects in Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. If you are looking for the perfect addition to your project team, a contractor who can deliver the results you need to succeed, Pivotal is the one. When it's critical, call Pivotal. They can be found online at pivotalperforms.com. This podcast is sponsored by Mayhall, Fondren Blaze, a Louisiana business litigation firm, offering sophisticated legal advice that is tailored to meet the needs of their individual clients, including a wide variety of litigation, complex business negotiations, corporate formations, closings, and title examination. As leading entrepreneurs, your valuable time and resources should align with the expertise of MFB, a Louisiana practice made for business. Learn how we can work with you at www.mfbfirm.com. So what I always feel interesting, Chris, is that in this Waitr model, you're getting the restaurants to put their menu on your platform, right?
Correct.
How hard was that to convince restaurants that that was a good thing? That seems like a real uphill challenge.
Yeah, so that wasn't really the big challenge, is like having them put the menu on. The challenge was we were going to charge them to do it.
That's right.
And that was a significant challenge and a hurdle to overcome.
But you're going to charge them to do it. You mean on top of a delivery fee?
Well, so the way we started was we were going to charge the restaurants $99 a month to put their menu on the Waitr app for people to be able to order food and us do the delivery.
Yeah. And
it was going to be a subscription model.
Right.
And believe it or not, restaurants didn't want to pay $99 a month for that.
Yeah.
And so we had to think about, okay, well, what do we do now? And so we changed our model from subscription to transactional,
right,
meaning that we would just take a percentage of everything that was ordered through Waitr.
I mean, that would seem to be even more difficult for them to buy into.
So our sales pitch was, this was a way for you to grow your business. And the very first customer that came on was a restaurant called Big Daddy's in Lake Charles. And it catered to a much older crowd, right? Yeah. And so when we went in to do the sales, they were one of the first restaurants we called on, or actually the very first one we convinced to put their menu on Waitr. The sales pitch was, and this was coming from a couple of young guys. So Evan and Addison were the ones doing the sales at that time, and they were young guys, right? And so technology was all the rage for them, right? And so they were sitting there with Jerry LeBlanc and said, look, this is a way for you to attract a younger customer. And that was a light bulb moment for him at the time, because he was thinking, and he told them at the time, he said, that's interesting because literally my customers are dying off every day, right? I mean, he catered to such an older crowd that he needed a way to draw in younger customers.
No kidding.
And so, technology was a way to do that. And so at least that's the way he saw it. Well, that was a pitch that we were making too.
Sure.
And so, that got him interested. And then, of course, once he was interested, we had a customer that we could tell other people, other restaurants that this customer is going to do it. So why don't you do it too? And it kind of started that snowball effect of getting people interested. But the other thing that we were telling them that they couldn't do without us is this was our sales pitch. Think about it this way. Your menu is in the pocket of every individual in Lake Charles that downloads this app.
Yeah.
Right? And they were spending money on billboards and on TV ads and on newspaper and on radio and all the traditional ways to try to draw in customers. But how cool would it be to have your menu in their pocket?
Yeah. God, that's so cool.
Right? Not in a menu drawer,
but
in a pocket where it could be pulled out and referred to at any time. That was the pitch, and it was very successful.
Yeah, but it's kind of a disruptive thing, right? It's new technology, and that can be difficult for people to buy into. Is it going to work? Are you going to take more money from the restaurant owner's perspective out of my register? And how's this going to work? So, but clearly, and I remember running into some of your employees one time at a dinner, a group of ladies that several of them worked for Waitr, and they were the biggest cheerleaders about your company. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like the culture was so strong there, and they're very passionate about about your company.
Yeah,
I do remember that.
So that's a big deal.
Yeah,
it ultimately was the downfall of Waitr, which is ASAP today. But
right, in what respect?
Well, people build companies,
right? Yeah.
And oftentimes companies get so big that they forget that it was the people that built the company,
right, and
not the company that supports the people.
Right.
And so, when you get to a certain point, and not just Waitr, but other companies around the world have gotten this way too. They think that people are doing business with them because of who the company is,
right, and
don't realize it's the people that are involved that are why the restaurants are doing business with the company.
Yeah. Look, there are so many things that I have to ask you, and we could talk for a really long time.
Yeah, this goes by quick.
Yeah, I'm gonna skip over some stuff, but a couple things before you got to an exit. You got a big hit from investment from Drew Brees, as I recall. That was probably.
Yeah. So he was part of our. We did a $10 million round of funding, and he was the lead investor in that round of funding.
Yeah, that's
and
nice.
That was probably a year or so before we had our exit, but. That was an interesting. Drew's a great guy, number one, but Absolutely. It was a really interesting time.
Yeah, and I can't help but think that there's power with that, in selling your story, and hey, it must be something really important there if someone of his significance is investing, and so your exit's about a year off from that point. Walk us through. What that experience was like. I mean, did you just get a call one day?
Well, no. So these things just kind of happen. I think most times. I like to believe some of the best things that happen are when you least expect them, right? And so in this situation, we were raising another round of capital, and we had hired an investment bank to go out and help us raise that capital. We had raised about $26 million up until that point. But we were going to go out and raise about 100 or 150 million.
Wow.
To really start to scale the business nationally. And we hired Wells Fargo to be our underwriters to do that. And in that process, we were still working with our restaurants, and we were having to adjust our pricing model. It was really expensive to do delivery, and so over time you learn what you have to do, and price needed to change. And so one of our customers was the Landry's group of restaurants, and so our head of sales was in Houston trying to negotiate a price change with the Landry's group of restaurants, and it was not going so well because we were increasing the take rate that we kept from the orders, and they didn't want to have any part of that. And so I get a call one day from Tyson, who's our head of sales, and he says, "Chris, look, they're not gonna budge. They're not gonna pay the higher take rate." And I'm like, "Well, Tyson, then they're just not gonna be on the app." And he's like, well, I don't think that's going to go over that well. And I said, well, look, if they don't like it, tell them they can buy us, right? And so I was kidding with him. Like, I didn't want him to go and do that, right? But we had a little conversation about what to do next. And so he gets off the phone, and this is on a Friday afternoon, 4:00 in the afternoon. He gets off the phone and goes back into the room with the folks that he's talking to there about this price increase. And he says, look, in a more diplomatic way than what I told him, he says, look, we're raising some capital, so I don't know if you guys would be interested in participating in our investment round. And he was talking to the chief legal officer's son, and he immediately called his dad and said, hey, Waitr's raising capital because they had a SPAC, right, a special purpose acquisition company, which they were trying to find a company to acquire.
And they were running out of time.
They were running out of time.
They had 18 months maybe.
Well, you had 2 years, and they were down to about 9 or 10 months, right, to find a company to acquire.
Got it.
So I get a call back from Tyson, and he's like, you're not going to believe this. He said, but I told him what you told me to tell him in not so many words, and they're interested, and they want to talk to you right now. And I'm like, well, Tyson, it's Friday night, 6 o'clock. I'm not going to talk to him tonight. Tell him I'll talk to him on Wednesday because I had a busy week coming up that following week. He's like, no, Chris, they want to talk now. Their chief legal officer wants you to call them immediately. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess this is real, right? So I got off the phone and I tried to get a hold of our investment banker who would not answer his phone. So I'm texting him and I'm calling him and I'm like, we had just hired these guys. And I'm like, okay, here we are at one of the biggest moments of our company, and I can't get the investment banker on the phone. Right. And I was not happy. I was not happy at all. And so, called a couple of my officers in the company, told them what was going on. I got to get a hold of our investment banker, and I don't want to use his name, but this is just crazy that I can't get a hold of him. So, I call and talk to Steve Scheinthal, who is the chief legal officer of the Landry's companies, and he tells me what they want to do. And I'm like, okay, well, that's quick, but, he wants us to go to Houston to meet with him. And I said, no, let's meet in Lake Charles. He said, okay, you guys come over to the Golden Nugget. Now, we had just finished our new office. That was one of their properties. Yeah. And we had just finished our new office. And I knew I needed to get them to our office so they could see we were a real company. I said, no, we'll meet you guys, but y'all come to our office on Monday. And so, hung up from that. And then I finally got a hold of our investment banker, and I said, you're not going to believe this. He said, let me guess. Landry's wants to buy Waitr, and they want to do it right now. I'm like, how do you know? He said, I just got off the phone with their CFO. And what we didn't know, or what I didn't know at the time, is that 2 weeks before that, Wells Fargo had sent a teaser about our investment round to the Landry's CFO.
Oh, wow.
So they were familiar with us through that as well. So the minute the chief legal officer called their CFO, they knew that this was a company they wanted to start talking to about acquiring for their SPAC. So that was kind of how it all came about.
Oh, man. When we raced through so much, but in that time, up to that conversation, you had built Waitr up to $200 million in revenues.
Well, at that point, we were in the year that we were going to finish at. We had done the previous year. We had finished at $70 million in revenue. We were going to finish at over $105 million in revenue.
Got it.
As a standalone company.
Right.
And then not long after we did the transaction, we bought another company that brought us to the $200 million in revenue.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
Cool.
So, but we had grown it from, an idea in a notebook to $100 million in revenue.
Yeah, unbelievable. So transformational, if you go back to not that many years before, you were maybe 6 years before, you're sleeping in your brother-in-law's couch in Gainesville, right?
Yeah.
And it's an acquisition, life-changing exit strategy.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. Life-changing, not just for me, but for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
Yeah, that is amazing. And your partners, the original two college kids stayed with you for the ride?
Yep. The original two stayed. I brought on two additional college students as co-founders when we first started. And
there's a really funny story about that.
Yeah.
that I read.
The McDonald's story?
No, this is a story I read where you were looking for 2 more partners and you had emailed over to McNeese,
The professors, yeah.
And he read your email out to his class, and 2 guys raised their hand or something to that effect.
Yeah, no, that's exactly how it happened. Yeah, 2 guys said, "Hey, I'll talk to him, be a part of it." And then another one, professor, we met at a meetup. And he had one of his students. He said, "Look, this is a really smart guy. He was a Columbian National, and he was in the master's program for electrical engineering." He said, "You need to meet him." So I met him at a McDonald's, and he was sitting across the table from just quiet as can be. I went through my whole spiel, and then he didn't say a word. And I said, "So what do you think? Do you want to be a part of it?" And he just shrugged his shoulder and said, "I guess." Those guys both became millionaires when we exited.
Unbelievable. So. What a fantastic story. So much there. I love to get the color for your whole entrepreneurial journey, but there's a lot of juice in what went on with Waitr. And you stay engaged for a while and but then you've moved on to a lot of new entrepreneurial things. What are your favorite things that are going on post Waitr?
Yeah, so, the thing I like to do most is help entrepreneurs figure out their own journey, right? And I do that in several different ways. I do it as an angel investor. I do it as an advisor in some cases. I do it as a board member, especially in the companies that I invest in. And that's where my passion lies. I had contemplated whether I'd jump back into the operations game in a startup, but I think right now I can make more of an impact by working with multiple entrepreneurs. And so, this story we just talked about today, I'm thinking about putting it in writing and, maybe building a course around entrepreneurship, around all of my experiences and things like that. But that's what drives me today. It's, helping other entrepreneurs figure out, number one, how do I take a great idea or a good idea and turn it into a great idea? And then also the opposite of that, how do I know when an idea is just not going to work and I've got to pivot and do something different? Yeah. Right. So that's how I hope to spend my time going forward.
Okay, let's talk Mallard Bay and BoomNation. Mm-hmm. Which one came first that you were engaged with?
So Mallard Bay is a company that my son founded based on an idea. Well, really on the idea that he wanted to book a trip for me and surprise me on a hunting trip for my birthday. And so he tried to find outfitters and just, he found an outfitter, thought it was going to be a great hunt. We went up there, didn't even fire a shot, drove, from Louisiana to Oklahoma. And to me, it was not about the hunting or any of that. Right, it was just about doing this with my son. But he was really disappointed, right? Right. And so Mallard Bay came out of an idea of there's got to be a better way for hunting and fishing sportsmen to find a hunting and fishing trip that's a quality trip with a quality outfitter that, they can enjoy and have a good time at. And so mallardbay.com is basically the Airbnb for hunting and fishing.
And when did they start that?
That started about 2.5 years ago.
Okay.
So.
And they're getting some traction?
They're getting significant traction, yep. They did over $1 million in bookings in the first quarter of this year.
No kidding.
They'll probably do another $1 million in bookings this quarter. Of course, they get a percentage of that, right?
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And it's a subscription business for outfitters who install the widget that they built on their own websites and helps outfitters manage their calendar. It takes all of the deposits and the chasing money from the outfitter's hand to a trusted third party. It makes it just super simple. And so outfitters love it. Sportsmen love it. I book trips. That's how I do my hunting trips now on Mallard Bay.
So fishing?
Hunting and fishing.
Hunting and fishing. So there's fish captains all over the coast, right?
All over the coast. That's correct.
And so that they must love that.
Fishing this is the first year we're really going into the fishing. Yeah. But it's starting to take hold. Hunting, this past season was the first full season of hunting season, and it was phenomenal. I mean, they did really well with that.
That's
and
fantastic.
I think fishing is going to be even bigger.
You're chairman of the board of that company, your son's company.
That's correct.
And chairman of the board of BoomNation. Tell us about BoomNation.
Yeah, so BoomNation is a marketplace that matches skilled workers with employers looking to hire skilled workers. And it takes them through the full life cycle of that process. So getting hired, getting onboarded onto a specific project for the company that they're going to work for, using BoomNation throughout that project, and then when that project ends, either showing them the next project with that employer or a new project with a new employer if that employer doesn't have another project going. So
yeah, we utilize labor services around the country, and I was interested and downloaded that app, and it looks really user-friendly and intuitive, and it looks like it would be a great product.
Yeah, the point there is we want to be built for the worker, right? So much software is built for entities or companies.
Yeah.
We want it to be built for the worker, so it's very user-friendly.
Yeah. Chris, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I love all your stories, and there's so many more that I know could have been told, and I appreciate you sharing those with us. Continued success in all you do, and thank you, sir, for sharing.
Well, thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Yep. It's very hard to talk to someone as accomplished as Chris and condense it into an hour long. We certainly could have talked for so much longer. Loved his stories. He's done so many different things, been extremely successful in so much of what he's done. I loved hearing that he's maybe contemplating writing some of these stories down and putting together a curriculum for an entrepreneurial course. That's very exciting. I also loved how Chris talked about the importance of family. And the support that he had from his wife and his children as he grew his businesses. And no matter what happened, he was going to have that support. And we talked about, circling back around and talking about that in the podcast when we ran out of time. But I think there's a lot to be said there about Chris as an individual, but recognizing the importance of that in the journey of an entrepreneur. So I appreciate him sharing that. I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll catch you next time. We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. They can be found online at b1bank.com. The Next Entrepreneur is produced by Propel Productions. You can find more information at propelyourstory.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Next Entrepreneur podcast and hit the bell for notifications. You can also follow us on social media. The links are in the description below.